The 10th best chess game of the 1950s is Pablo Moran Santa Maria versus Eduardo Franco Raimundo, played in 1955. Now, it's unlikely that you're very familiar with these two chess players, but Moran was a respected chess journalist, and he did write an acclaimed work about the fourth world chess champion, Alexander Alekhine, Agony of a Chess Genius. In this game, he plays a true masterpiece of which even Alekhine would have been proud. The game opens with the classical Sicilian, the Richter-Rauser variation. Now, of course, today there's a lot of theory here, very deep theory, but this is 1955. This is cutting edge, this is trendy, the main ideas are still to be uncovered. White plays for bishop g5 and castling queenside, and black goes for kingside castling. We have here the traditional Sicilian, opposite sides castling, rich attacking opportunities for both players, and a race to get to the opponent's king first. Now here white plays 9f4. This position has been seen thousands and thousands of times, and today we would expect black to play either 9h6, tickling the bishop here on g5, asking it what it wants to do, or knight takes d4, trading off the strong knight on d4 and getting ready for counterplay down the half-open c file, a critical file for black in the Sicilian defense. In this game, though, we instead see a major error. That is the move e5. I already think here that this is the critical error in the game. It may not be losing yet, but from this point on, there will be no good options available to black. Why is this move so bad? Well, first off, if you want to play e5, you should be playing the knight or Sicilian instead. You can get e5 in one move in better circumstances instead of here in two moves. Losing a tempo in a sharp opening like the Sicilian defense like this is really a recipe for disaster. Also, e5 has a lot of strategic drawbacks. Those drawbacks still exist in the knight or Sicilian as well, but in this case, they're all magnified by the position on the board. You're weakening the d5 square, you're weakening the d6 pawn, and you're just creating a lot more opportunities for white along the whole d file. So, in this position, basically anything that is sensible is quite good for white, but white goes for a very logical knight to f3, not retreating to b3 as might be necessary in the knight or Sicilian in many cases. This is more active, and another example of why e5 is horribly mistimed. Now, bishop to g4. So maybe this is black's point. I've pushed the e-pawn so I can develop this bishop. However, even this isn't really that desirable, because after the bishop is poked by pawn to h3, what are you going to do? If you retreat, then white is getting more of a pawn storm going towards your king, and if you trade, as happens in the game, then the g file opens, and you certainly never ever want to have an open file leading directly to your king. This is going to be a critical file for white in this game. So after pawn takes f3, we see knight to d4, tickling the pawn on f3, but white is the one in charge here. He's not responding to simple threats from black. He's pushing forward. Pawn takes on e5. There's no time to take on f3 because white is in position to sacrifice his queen. Pawn takes, knight takes d2, pawn takes with a fork, and after the queen moves, you can capture with check. Note that your bishop is hanging here, but you can retreat and capture the knight on d2. You now have a rook and three minor pieces for the queen, and you are up gobs of material and easily winning. In the game, therefore, black plays pawn takes e5, recapturing here, and white continues to push forward and undermine the knight on d4. Queen to a5, and after pawn takes on e5, this is under attack and this is under attack. Black is relying on here the move knight to f3, attacking the bishop on g5, attacking the queen on d2, but just as we said a moment ago, when your opponent is underdeveloped and overpressing, you should try to ignore their threats and press forward with your own threats. Therefore, white plays the spectacular move, pawn takes f6, sacrificing the queen. It's very similar to the line that we just saw, but it is not so clear because we are no longer picking up a rook and three minor pieces for the queen. It will be a closer material balance with some interesting tactics. So knight takes d2, black has no choice but to accept the queen sacrifice here. Pawn takes on e7, attacking the rook here. If queen takes g5, then you can capture with check and you can capture on d2. There's no real counterplay against the pinned rook because after rook d8, you just have bishop d3. Now, in this case, We don't have a rook and 3 minor pieces for the queen, but a rook and 2 minor pieces should still be enough to win the game. So, after pawn takes e7, black continues in desperado style. Knight takes f1. White captures the rook with check. Black recaptures here. And in this position, it's interesting to think about how to deal with all the hanging pieces. I would encourage you to pause your video and try to pick the best continuation available to white. The first thing to notice here is that the bishop is under attack on g5. The black queen on a5 all the way across the board is hitting it, and if you capture the knight on f1, then after queen takes g5 check, black is up material and should win the game. However, the second thing to notice is in white's favor. It is that this knight on f1 is close to being trapped, and if you win it cleanly, then you should be able to win the game. The simplest and cleanest way to win the knight is with rook d5, attacking the queen and defending the bishop and controlling the 5th rank. The only retreating square for the black queen that also defends the knight on f1 is a6, but then after bishop f4, the knight is very cleanly trapped, and after rook back to d1, you will win the knight on f1 and should win the game. However, after king takes f8, white tried bishop f4, going for the immediate trap of the knight. Now, this move does win beautifully, and white finds all the right moves, but black has some resources that must be foreseen. First off, knight to g3, a clever try. Now, if bishop takes g3, then there is queen g5 check because you have not controlled the 5th rank yet, and the bishop on g3 falls, black should win the game. So after knight g3, white tries rook g1, using more tactics. If the knight goes back to h5, then there is rook g5, and I love the idea of forking 2 pieces like this that are literally on completely opposite sides of the board. The knight is lost, and white should win the game. But black is not done yet. More resources. Black picks up 2 pawns for the knight, first e4 and then a2. Now, what is this position? White has a rook and 2 minor pieces for a queen and 2 pawns. This is a slightly favorable material imbalance for white, but of course things are complicated. First off, black's queen is up in white's king's business, and that's going to affect things. White should be doing well, but is white winning by force? Well, the answer is yes, if you see the following combination coming. First off, bishop to d6 check. Now, in this position, you don't want to run into the middle of the board. There's a lot of reasons, actually, but one very clean refutation here is knight to f6 check, and after pawn takes rook check, you have a skewer picking off the rook on a8. You can include the move bishop to a3 check to make sure there's no counterplay, and then you can pick off the rook and win the game pretty comfortably. So, after bishop d6 check, the king goes to g8. Now, white certainly feels like he's in an attacking spot here. The king on g8 doesn't feel comfortable, but is there a forced win again? What do you play? I encourage you to pause your video and try to calculate everything to the end if you really want an instructive challenge. Well, white plays the move, rook takes g7 check. Boom! A beautiful, beautiful rook sacrifice. Now, in the game, black declined this rook sacrifice, but of course the critical question is, what if you accept it? After king takes g7, rook g1 check, the knight and bishop perfectly cover the f-file escape squares, so black is forced back to the h-file. Now, king h8 is pretty simple. Bishop check, 1 block, you take, and checkmate. But king h6 is not so easy, and I spent a while trying to find the forced mate without looking at a computer line before I actually did it. I think there are some subtle checks here that are a little bit counterintuitive. So you first have bishop f4 check, pretty straightforward, and after king here, you're probably looking at the knight checks, but they don't go anywhere. You need rook g5 check. Now, if the king steps back, king h6, it's pretty easy. Here you can go rook g4 check, and then the knight check on f6 is mate. But what if the king runs up the board instead of back? So after rook g5 check, king h4, the h3 pawn is under attack, and that feels critical because can you really lose that pawn? Well, yes, you can. The right move is rook g4 check, and whichever way the king goes, whether back to h5, in this case you have knight f6 check, a mate we've already seen, or forward, capturing the pawn on h3, you have these knight mates. Knight f2, a beautiful, beautiful checkmate. I love the fact that the knight is both giving the critical check and defending the rook that was under attack. All of white's 3 pieces are perfectly coordinated in this very fine checkmate. Now, in the game, after rook takes g7 check, black did deny us this opportunity, did not allow white to play this on the board, and retreated with king h8. But this did allow white another pretty opportunity. There are many good moves here, but rook g8 check is the prettiest and is played in the game, forcing black to take that rook that black so crucially, so meanly denied on the last turn. Here, after rook g8 check, you can capture with the rook or the king. If king takes g8, the mate is very forced here. Check, and then bishop e5 check, f6 block, and you take and mate. If the rook takes, then it is not forced mate, but white is easily winning on material. Bishop check, f6, you can take, you block, you have check. There is one block. The queen comes back all the way from a2 to go to g8, but then you just liquidate everything down. You have an extra knight in the endgame, and you win very, very comfortably. I hope that you've enjoyed this game. It is a really beautiful game, and I always love to see a masterpiece by a chess amateur. It is the perfect reminder that anyone can play a beautiful game of chess. If you want to see my 9th best chess game of the 1950s, I've already published it. It is the game Carries vs. Szabo from 1953. I did this analysis on my channel a while back. I have become better as a video editor and otherwise presenter on YouTube since then, but it's still a strong analysis. Check it out. It is popping up on your screen as I speak.